Thank you very much. We're very happy to be here. I'm Kerry Wynn. I teach history at Washburn University in Topeka, Kansas. And I am very new to digital humanities. I've been doing this for about a year, so it's only mildly terrifying to be standing here in front of you today and talking about this. Last summer in 2016, I was lucky to be part of a workshop that's funded by the NEH and taught by scholars at the George Mason Center for History and New Media that introduced mid-career historians to tools in digital history, right? Without this, I would not be standing here. That gave me kind of the impetus to get started, particularly in teaching about digital tools and teaching in digital humanities. We are at a primarily undergraduate institution, so whenever I learn about kind of new methods of doing history or new approaches, I immediately think, how am I going to teach this to undergraduates? And how are we going to showcase undergraduate work? That's particularly how we think of ourselves, right? So everything that you're going to see today that we are going to show to you, it was created by undergraduates, right? Many of whom were involved in the course that we taught in the spring called Digital Storytelling, Kansas History and Literature. Right? And this site that you see was designed by another student who was a research assistant of ours. So it's all undergraduate created, right? The course that we taught in the spring of 2017 was for undergraduate history and English majors. So they did not have a lot of skills in tech coming into it. Some of them were terrified of it, basically had Facebook pages. Some were, however, very savvy, more savvy than I was. So they really ran a range of skills. This was a team-taught course, which is very important to us. We're very lucky to be at an institution where they value team teaching. Generations of scholars before myself who worked there put into place a system whereby we can team teach. And so it was very important and essential to the course that we're team teachers. I've done some research on team teaching lately and collaborative teaching. And collaborative teaching is to us both being in the classroom at the same time, what's called the participant observer model. So one person is giving the material of the class and acting as kind of the lead instructor, but the other person who's the faculty member is always there and participating, sometimes in the way that the students are participating. It was also important to us that this course is based in the archive, and Tom will talk about that in just a moment because it's his archive. So if you're interested in how we taught the course, the syllabus is up on the website, and the website is AverillKansasCollection.com. So you can go to the syllabus. It's a very ambitious syllabus. I think the next time we would focus more on just kind of one type of technology like Omeka, which was mentioned earlier. But really the idea was to get students into the archive telling student-driven stories about the resources that they were interacting with. So this is kind of the core of the course as we imagined it. And then I'm going to pass it off to Tom, who will talk a little bit more about getting the project started and the archive itself.
Thank you. Well, the archives are essentially, I've been teaching Kansas literature for over 40 years. I just retired from Washburn University, and I had collected about 3,000 books over my time of teaching, and so I gave those to the library, and since then, with other acquisitions, we're up to about 4,000 books or so on. So a very nice collection. I've always been interested in how Kansas is represented in literature, but also in how literature then represents Kansas elsewhere. And I think both the interplay between those things is very important. So I've been a collector, and that's great. And I've also, for years, collected a lot of data. I have a map of Kansas literature that students and I put together, kind of an early digital teaching in a way, and we create pages for various Kansas writers. And this contains a lot of information, somebody like Langston Hughes, biography, bibliography, you know, et cetera, et cetera. The problem with it is that it's not very searchable. So it's a collection of things, just like an archives is, but how do you know what's in it? And so if someone looks at this, they can see maybe who's black, who's white, who's female, who's male, you know, something about generational, but you can't tell a whole lot about it. If you want to know, were there any beat poets from Kansas? And you wouldn't know that Michael McClure wrote Janis Joplin's "Give Me a Mercedes-Benz" song, or that Charlie Plymell brought Allen Ginsberg here so he could write Wichita Vortex Sutra, and Plymell also teamed up with R. Crumb to publish the first Zap comic book years ago. So you can't find out, you know, there's stories in there, but you can't find them, and that was the notion. So the opportunity that Kerry offered me to sort of go from having a Kansas Studies collection to having Kansas Studies connection was what we were really trying to foster in the archives and also in the course itself. So I wanted to sort of tell you a little bit about our process. The excitement about using the collection as a text was part of that. Also the notion that we could collaborate not just with our students and with other faculty. We even had other faculty coming in and looking at our students' websites and critiquing them and telling them how they might expand the story out. But also with other cultural institutions in Topeka, the Public Library, the Kansas State Historical Society. There are great resources that the students sort of drove us to, you know, where can we find out more than what is just in the collection. My job was kind of to talk to the students about what makes a good story, the who, what, why, where, when sort of thing, and to try to help them narrow down their thinking about what they wanted to explore into something that was specific enough to do in a semester, but also broad enough and contextual enough that it would shed light on larger issues about Kansas. So that's basically what we did. They chose their stories. I went through the collection and we created what we called the cart. And the students would come in and look at the books on the cart and try to make connections between those books. We also had help from our university archivist, Martha Imperato. And I want to just show you, because we don't have a lot of time, but what happened with one particular student. And I don't know if we want to, I guess we don't need to show the video about the collection or whatever, but this was a student who's a double major. You wanted to see a video? Okay, I think.
We had the chance to fundraise. The university gave us a chance to fundraise. So this was produced by the university, and they had a kind of crowdfunding initiative, and so we filled out and they did this video.
Connections to the community, because this is really a Kansas collection. I mean, this really tells the very rich and deep history and literary tradition of Kansas. I'm Kerry Wynn. I'm an associate professor of history at Washburn University. We want visitors to this site to really find a digital portal into this amazing collection.
I'm Tom Averill. I am a library in residence and professor of English here at Washburn University. Behind me is the Thomas Longstable Kansas Studies collection.
The goal of digital technology is not to get rid of the book, it is to celebrate the book.
As a collection, they're extremely valuable because they sit next to each other and they talk to each other.
That's where the magic is if you can give our really incredible students a voice in the public.
Here's a couple works by the author David Quick, author and artist that I'll be researching. You can see how he writes his poetry onto the page and illustrates them.
And we're hoping for him to meet David Quick, travel to Wichita, interview him.
So you connect this print source to its location in the world. And then you see it not only from the writer's perspective, but you see it from your own perspective and the student's perspective, right?
I think it's very important for donors to support this type of project. It gives students the opportunity to to do things like this, to research authors?
Because the students will learn skills that they can take into their careers. They'll experience history, right? They'll experience literature. They can learn how to craft their own stories that are engaging and convincing and connect them to the history of Kansas, the history of Washburn, and the history of Topeka.
Okay. You saw Jason, young Jason, who wanted to research a Wichita artist named David Quick. Well, Jason ended up doing something even larger than that. He got interested in this relationship between text and art. And in the collection, there's a lot of fine art, there's a lot of fine printing, there's a lot of posters, there's a lot of poetry that's done as art. And so Jason came up with the idea of looking at the interplay between text and art, and he called it illuminated authorship. And it really plays a big role all throughout his. First of all, he created a website. So he has here's the David Quick that he was talking about, and the research that he did. And he did end up going to Wichita to interview David Quick for about 3 hours one Saturday. We also found posters in the collection that had been done by Kevin Young, who's one of the great poets in the United States, also happens to be from Topeka, Kansas, also happens to now be the director of the Schomburg Center in New York City at the Public Library, and the current poetry editor of the New Yorker. So Kevin had given these two pieces to our collection, actually to me, and then I'd given it to the collection. So there's some important work there to be looked at. And we had some fine printing as well. Come on, there we go. A book called Quilting, which is made up totally of handmade paper looking like quilts in the shape of quilts with quilt materials in it. So Jason had a lot of stuff to look at. We ended up collaborating with the Mulvane Art Museum on the Washburn campus. And so also that brought the Mulvane into it. And Jason ended up curating a show at the Mulvane of this work, as well as creating this digital site, which anybody can visit if you just type in illuminated authorship. And then finally, once he had created all the placards and we got all the work suitable for showing, the library said, let's go ahead and put it up on the walls of the library. So now it's permanently going to be taken out of storage and put up in the library where there's available space. So we consider that kind of a success story. Not all of them were completely successful. Some people bit off more than they could chew. Some people just couldn't chew at all. And so we had mixed results. But I think all in all, the best thing about it was what we learned from each other, what the students learned from each other, the kind of challenges that we all faced in working with digital. If Kerry was a little terrified talking about digital in front of you guys, I'm even worse. I'm demonized by it. You know, I don't know. But that was our basic kind of experiment with doing the digital storytelling. I'll turn it back over to Kerry, or we can take questions about some of the challenges and that kind of thing that we faced.
No, we had that one video. The opportunity for crowdfunding really came up as we were planning the course, and then we talked about how do we sustain this project, right? So for much of the class, and I think a lot of the benefit of the class comes not necessarily from the sites themselves, but the effects on the students and their, first of all, comfort level with digital tools so that they someday can know how to at least ask questions about those tools. And then in their projects and going out and learning how to conduct oral histories, ask archivists about materials, getting into the stories, starting to learn how in a group to create these narratives. And so that was the only one that was a video. We did allow students to select their own tools. Most of them used WordPress, some of them used Omeka, but most of them produced, one of them used StoryMap by Esri, but you know, most of them were very kind of typical sites, websites on the topics that they chose. And these came out of, so we had a discussion with the class about what topics they wanted to study. We came up with them as a class. What stories did they want to tell after Tom gave some background about Kansas history, told some stories of his own, kind of modeling how to tell a story about an event or an anecdote, and make its importance wider. And then the class decided upon these topics. These aren't all of them, they're just a sampling. And then groups kind of coalesced around particular topics. Yeah.
We did have some students who did a kind of survey as you engage their site, and then they did a little Wordle at the bottom that shows what most people said when they responded to that survey. These different images of Kansas. So we had them trying all sorts of things. Yeah.
Thank you. Tom, you said that yours is now searching for file. So the question of not having, a file that people could actually extract information or do searches and then get to generate information. Did any of your students express an interest in going further, doing more toward that end of things? Because that is a limitation, I find. Because I'm in an English department, I'm often pushing the idea of, don't just look at one text, look at quite a few texts, but that means you got to read much more and you got to do more searching. But if there's a searchable file, it makes it a lot easier. So I'm interested in knowing how many students seem to be going in that direction, if at all.
Well, the students didn't go in that direction, but we have. So we have another project that we're proposing for grant funding to try and transfer that to a more usable platform, and to make the map much more interactive. Right now it's static. In the time period, so this is all work that students did in probably about 10 weeks of the semester. So they had very discrete storytelling interests. But I would hope that if we can change the interface of the map, it will serve those projects.
And we did raise enough money with that impact grant in order to hire somebody to digitize some materials and to create more bibliography from the cart. So that people could at least see what the students had access to as they were doing their projects.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.